Welcome, dear learners, to week 3 Movements in Climate Change. We already know that climate change as a movement, it started from the latter part of the 20th century. However, the foundations of these movements and the awakening towards climate change that happened long before. So, as far as the 19th century, there was an awakening to the carbon content in the atmosphere. And we already know that the 19th century was the time when the ills of the industrialization had started. So we know at this time the Victorian poets and the later romantic poets, they were talking about human beings being taken up by technology and taken up by material pursuits, and they were neglecting nature. And so that beginning of that sensibility of moving away from nature and getting embroiled in ambitions, material pursuits, that was coming. And obviously the effect of industries was also taking its toll on the atmosphere very gradually. So in 1850s, John Tyndall discovered the role of gases like carbon dioxide in trapping heat in the Earth's atmosphere. In 1896, Svante Arrhenius theorized that increased industrial activity and burning of fossil fuels could lead to a gradual warming of the planet through the greenhouse effect. So the early understanding and scientific study of climate was there, and all this was reflected in the literature of that time too, because industrialization did not just mean exploitation of the environment, it also meant exploitation of the weaker sections of society like women and like children. So during this Victorian era, we have writers like Charles Dickens who talk about these children who are put to work in the industries, and they talk about various social ills coming out of this industrialization. So this was the early awakening to climate change. Pre-environmentalism. So we can call this pre-environmentalism also. The late 19th century and the early 20th centuries focus more on conservation and the preservation of natural resources. So ever since the happening of the two world wars, the idea of conservation and the idea of preservation of natural resources was also in the air, since people were beginning to realize that industry needed this non-renewable fuels, and also the coming of locomotives, the use of equipment in the wars, and the aeroplanes, the rubber tires, all those things were coming out of industry. So environment was gradually being ruined. So there were the rubber plantations that were put in by colonizers, and the natural crops, the traditional crops were removed. In the same way, indigo was planted in India and in the fields, and traditional crops were removed. It led to extreme poverty, and the farmers went into debt, and the environment was ruined, because nature has a certain kind of adaptation. The soil conditions, the temperature, the specific microbes, they are all matched, and they are all in a pattern or an ecosystem. So destroying this for the sake of money obviously showed certain results, which led these scientists to study the results of all this exploitation of land and getting cash crops. So there was probably an idea that there should be something done to conserve all these crops and these grain areas, because industry was taking up so much, and especially in the third world countries. So John Muir advocated for the protection of natural landscapes, leading to the creation of national parks in United States. Theodore Roosevelt, the president, then his government had conservation policies. So very early on, the conservation policies were there, but environmental movement or climate change literature as such was not there. It may have been some concern in romantic literature, or maybe a part of science fiction, but as such, what climate fiction stands for today, it was not so well developed at that time. The rise of environmentalism, 1960s to 70s, a broader awakening. So we already know the Bible of climate fiction, climate science, climate change is Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, 1962. Carson's book exposed the harmful effects of pesticides like DDT, which opened the public's eye to the wider consequence of unchecked industrial activity on the environment. So DDT was the main villain here, but obviously there were other chemicals also and pesticides that were used thoughtlessly, and Carson saw the effect. She herself was a scientist, and she saw the effects of all this. She had studied them, so she wrote about them in this creative work, Silent Spring. And this led to a new wave of environmental awareness, the coming of climate change awareness, and a strong desire was there on part of environmentalists to protect the earth from human-caused harm, setting the stage for broader environmental movements. So the first very strong movement of a kind was inspired by Rachel Carson. And since there was an issue about the pharmaceutical companies, and if DDT was banned, their investments and profits would stop. So these companies, they had banned this book for over a decade, but the book resurfaced after her death, and it has become like a Bible for environmentalists, because it deals so clearly with the ill effects of using pesticides and chemical fertilizers. So today that idea is very strong in America and other developed countries, and not so much in developing countries, because the literacy is low, people are not exposed to that knowledge, and of course the companies would not want that there should be some system which can make people aware that these pesticides and chemicals are dangerous, and these can go into the rainwater, into our drinking water. And so we already have so many examples of such events of people in villages being poisoned by poisoned groundwater, and not knowing the cause, what caused the certain deaths or what caused those diseases. They knew it's water, but how did the water get poisoned? So making them understand the science of how pesticides pollute drinking water, which is groundwater. These things are part of education, and all this sense of passing on the message and creating an awakening all started in the later part of the 20th century. Pre-60s, This was again pre-environmental times, the 1960s. They were characterized by conservation efforts of wildlife and land conservation. And the Silent Spring of 1962, it talked about environmental degradation, particularly due to chemical pesticides like DDT. So I do remember that must have been the 70s, where children in schools in the hills, they were allowed to take walks in the forested area, which was called the government ground. But they were told never to break a branch, never to pick a leaf. So, if this kind of um, rules and this kind of direction to children is there, it helps a lot. And when we talk about the 70s, these things were in the air. So somehow in some schools, these ideas must have come up about not to harm nature, not to destroy it. So The Silent Spring was a very powerful book, and the ideas were very futuristic. Till today, the issue of pesticides is there. In a country like US, pesticides are still used because they need to have uh, huge crop to feed in the entire population. So we are told uh, crops like corn and wheat are also pesticide ridden. So fruits, vegetables are pesticide ridden. So she was very futuristic in trying to talk about the harm, and in this way she predicted the harm that would be there even so many decades later. So from the 60s to 70s, as we already talked about it, there was the rise of modern environmentalism, and these movements which grew were focusing on pollution, air quality, and human health. So the concerns changed, and the idea that the air was polluted and that human health was affected by pesticides and polluted air, that idea started developing, and there was a growing awareness, so much so that in 1970 the first Earth Day was celebrated, April 22nd, 1970, and over 20 million people in the US participated, and it became a global event. So now we hear about the Earth Day, and we tend to think of it on same level as there are so many Friends Day and Mother's Day and Father's Day. But at a time in the 1970s, when it came for the first time, it really showed a turning point, that the Earth was getting attention, and there were 20 million people in US who participated on this Earth Day, and it became a global movement. The emergence of climate science, 1970s. So climate science emerged, and there was this scientist whose name was Charles Keeling. He produced critical research and confirmed rising levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide. So Charles Keeling, his name is very important and is linked to the early studies of atmospheric carbon dioxide. The Keeling curve depicted the steadily rising carbon dioxide in the atmosphere since 1958. So the Keeling curve has been adopted from his name, and this graph, it tells us about the rising of CO2, how it has been rising steadily since 1958. So you can see that the two world wars were a big contributing factor to the rise of carbon dioxide. The bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So it's not just one country that suffered this terrible bombing, but the air was polluted all round. And air is something that is common to all the organisms, all the living human and non-human creatures. So that same air is taken by plants and animals, And so we can say that the atmosphere must have been very polluted after the world wars. James Hansen, a NASA scientist, began warning of human-caused global warming. By mid-1970s, there was a growing awareness among scientists that human activities were causing climate change. So gradually, from this awareness of high carbon dioxide levels, the study comes to the fact that it is all human induced. So whatever carbon dioxide has increased in the last 200 years, that much took thousands of years. That amount which we have managed to grow in 200 years, that used to take thousands of years. So one can imagine how deadly climate change impacts are. And also some writers, some scientists maintain that when the dinosaurs were killed in the last ice age, the earth was exactly in the same way it is today. So one should not hold oneself superior to animals, because all life is same and everybody gets affected. So when the ages were there, when the dinosaurs disappeared, a lot of organisms and animals disappeared, including plants. So human beings cannot be an exception. So late 1970s, there were some policies formed related to climate change, and there was a growing awareness in America, in Europe. The government took note and tried to form certain policies. So the first climate research in 1970s, Stockholm Conference was there on human environment, create a basis for consideration within the United Nations of the problems of human environment. 1 and 2, focus the attention of governments and public opinion in various countries on the importance of the problem. So these were the points in the Stockholm Conference on human environment. Scientific consensus building in 1979. The first World Climate Conference was held in 1979 in Geneva, and a news clipping is there showing you that how climate impact was taken seriously. The scientists felt that climate change was a global concern. So you can say, moving out of not just America or Europe, they realized that it was a global concern, and that's why international panels had to be formed. So the first World Climate Conference took place in 1979. The formation of environmental organizations. So there are several of these organizations. Greenpeace, founded in 1971, Ecology and Environmentalism, the Peace Movement. It was the combination of these two that led to the creation of Greenpeace. So the Greenpeace organization is still active today in various countries in the world, but their work is very difficult when they have to confront capitalist lobbies, the governments that support the policies of industrialists and business organizations. So here there comes a clash between the environmentalists. And 1980s climate reports talked about the accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. IPCC formation was in 1988. The Intergovernmental panel on climate change. IPCC is a very important organization because the year-to-year reports on the changes in climate and air temperatures, in the carbon content, related to the GHGs, all these things become resource material for activists through open demonstrations and workshops, and also through books and literature. So IPCC is an important organization, and it gives an authentic roundup of what is happening as far as climate change is concerned. It helps to formulate policies also. So it was established by the United Nations to assess scientific research on climate change and its impacts, marking the formalization of climate change as a distinct global issue. So we can see with the passage of time, by 1988, the IPCC formation made climate change a real issue, and not only of one country but a global issue. First policy initiatives, the Montreal Protocol 1987. So there was something about the ozone layers, how they are destroyed by using too much of aerosol cans and other things that have aerosol, industries that release aerosol, those chlorofluorocarbons, which are very harmful and which destroy the ozone. So in spite of their realizing that industry releases these chemicals, yet today there is a boost in the market for all these things that really harm the earth climate and harm human beings. But we still stick to it, as ironically enough, one would want to give up the ACs, or one would want to stop using a refrigerator. But how can it be possible when already the system, the ecosystem is heating up so fast, the globe is heating up so fast that one cannot do without these the products of technology, and which in turn also create more harm. The Kyoto Protocol 1997, signed as part of the UNFCCC, legally binding emissions and setting reduction targets for industrialized countries. So who was part of this Kyoto Protocol? 192 nations except America. It was an international treaty related to climate change, and there was a pledge to save Earth and fight climate change. So as the other protocols come in, other such organizations come in, the severity of climate change grows, and something related to climate change, one of the issues is taken up. So it was different in the Montreal one. Now in the Kyoto Protocol, they are going to fight to save the earth and reduce climate impact. In 2000 to the present, climate change becomes mainstream, and we can see it in the number of publications coming out, both fiction and non-fiction, plus theatre and drama. And we have something in India called Nukkad Natak. So the themes are related to these. This is street theatre, and in the themes of this street theatre, of the skits, are related to social problems, women's status, but climate change is also one of them. So these have been conducted by various groups, and because climate change has become an important issue today. So Al Gore, the vice president's influence was felt around the world. The documentary that was created by him, An Inconvenient Truth, brought climate change to the forefront of popular discourse, particularly in Western countries. So here what is interesting is that whereas government is concerned, it's very rare that somebody will stand up and speak the truth. So Al Gore's attempt to shine light on things that would rather not be spoken, or maybe the government was silent on them, it really caught the attention of people around the world, because he spoke about the real truths about climate change in this documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, in 2006. So what was the content of it? It was based on scientific facts about CO2 in the atmosphere, which was understood and evaluated through ice core testing in Mauna Loa Observatory. So this ice core testing is one of the methods, scientific methods to test the carbon content in the air thousands of years ago. So the carbon dioxide trapped in ice crystals that are buried under the snow and have been buried for thousands of years, those crystals, they are used to study the carbon inside them. So then the scientists have learned that in 200 years, we have got so much of carbon in the atmosphere, which used to take thousands of years to reach this level. So people who are in the political system, if they decide to tell the truth, it is very impactful, and it helps in forming policies related to climate change, and it helps forming public opinion also. The Paris Agreement 2015. What was the agenda here? It was limiting global warming to below 2 degrees centigrade, signaling the global reach of the climate change movement. So if we just think about the Montreal Protocol and the Kyoto Protocol, the seriousness with which offices and international organizations were seeing climate change, that was getting more refined, more serious, more focused. So this was what we would call climate change movement, and with each protocol, each agreement, international conference, the seriousness of the matter has grown, and finally in this Paris Agreement, there was a call to limit global warming to below 2 degrees centigrade. So if we just look at this in a very deep kind of manner, we know what are the things that cause global warming. The main villains in this are meat eating, the multiplication of cattle. So is there any possible way that people could change their eating habits, especially in a country like America, where meat is eaten in huge quantities, and there are huge industries that thrive on processing meat, and then there are outlets like McDonald's, KFC, which give fast foods, and we already know that that shift is there from eating simple home cooked meals to eating fast food, which is harmful. So if one were to, so we'll just stop here. Let us finish with this lesson. We'll continue in the next one. So I hope I was able to give you some information about the various panels and organizations related to climate change.